I'm Renee Romeo, and this is the first in a set of video series that will explain to you how to reupholster a sofa. I've flipped the sofa over so that the bottom is facing up. I have a needle nose pliers. You may need a pair of scissors, good fabric scissors, to get through some of these areas. They may be stuck and you might have to kind of cut around them to pull the pieces out. An upholstery staple remover, and it has like a V cut in the top of it so that you can get in underneath the staple and pry it out. There's a cardboard strip that runs all the way along the length of this. Well, geez, it should, but it doesn't. But it should. In the end, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it right. But this cardboard piece needs to be pried off. Get in underneath the staple, pry it, and a lot of times, you know, especially with this really nice V cut in this tool, you can twist your staple and pull it out. This is just a quick demonstration of the technique for removing staples. I get my staple remover in there, I get it underneath it, and I twist it, and it pops right out. And I can do the next one the same exact way. I get the tip underneath it, twist it, and out it comes. Marking each and every piece as you pull it off of your sofa is vitally important to keeping track of every single element that you're going to have to put back together. So as you're moving along, get a piece of paper, a sticky pad, a little scrap piece, and pin it. Don't just stick it on there, but with adhesive, but pin it on. At this point, I've taken off the skirt, I've taken off the dust cover, and I've also taken off the piece of cording that ran all the way around the upper part of the skirt. Now this piece of perforated metal, what it does is it grabs onto the fabric and it pulls it nice and taut in the back. And it's got little teeth on it, so you kind of have to be a little bit careful. Here we go. I'm going to, since it's pried up all the way along the edge there, so I'm just going to pull it. I'm going to get it away from the teeth so that I can get a good grip on it and pull it out. I'm partway through removing this metal piece. As you can see, it's very flexible. It's got teeth on one side and a hole on the other side. This is the method for attaching to the sofa, and this is the method for attaching the fabric to the back. So I'm just going along here, removing staple after staple, and when I go to put this back on, I'm not going to be using staples. I'll actually wind up using small tacks. It works out a little bit better, at least for me. Lining up the holes and making sure that I'm really following the contour along properly. And now I'm ready to go ahead and take off this side panel. There's another metal piece that sits right here, which pulls the fabric really nice and tight. And I'd like to demonstrate how to take that off. You're just going to get in between the fabric pieces and just pry it. And then I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Normally they take the fabric, they fold it around it, and it's just a piece of metal. It's pretty flexible, and it's got these spikes, if you can see. That's what actually attaches into the sofa and keeps everything, really nice and tight. So we save every bit of these, don't throw them out. This cardboard is used extensively throughout a piece. And the reason why they do it is to get a nice crisp line when you're upholstering underneath something, or you've got a skirt that needs to really be nice and straight. You can't get that simply by stapling. If you tried to staple this, what will wind up happening in the finished piece once you pull everything nice and taut is that you'll get these little tuck marks, and that's really not a sign of quality. I've already removed some of the back along the top here and along the sides on the front part of it. But I do need to get to the back of it so that I can pull the entire front off. Usually what happens is there's a space in between the arm and the back that allows the fabric to flow through, and then get stapled to the side. Along the bottom here, we'll just untuck this fabric. They use it normally to extend the actual decorative fabric to the back of the sofa so you have a staple surface. If you have a really old piece that the fabric is disintegrating, I've run across that before, you could just use a drapery lining fabric. It works just fine. This is a specialized fabric that's really hard to find in your local fabric store. So either get a drapery lining or try to reuse what's there. All of my staples have been removed along the back, the sides, and the bottom of the back cushions. These happen to be attached to the frame, so everything's going to come off at once. And it's just a matter of, once you get all of your staples out, that you just pull them forward and they'll come out. So there's 1 and 2. You know, sometimes the backing of the upholstery fabric it's a little bit like Velcro. So I'm just going to go ahead and peel this away. We're still working on getting this decking fabric off of the sofa, and what I would like to show you is exactly how this is attached. I have the flap here that would wrap over. We pull it back, and then it exposes a very thick twine that they use to attach it to the bottom spring frame. And what you're going to want to do in order to get that apart is simply get in there with a pair of scissors and clip it. Pull it through and out and continue on, and then we can pull the fabric directly off. The next part of the process of pulling this sofa apart is to take all of the stitching out between any pieces that happen to be sewn together. And I use 2 tools for that purpose. One is a very sharp pair of scissors. A more important tool to have is a seam ripper. You can see what the seam ripper looks like. It's got a shape kind of like this. And it's very sharp on one tip, and then it has a ball on the other tip. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the longer tip and you're going to place that right at the seam of the stitching. And you're going to get it in between there, and you're just going to move it with a little bit of pressure down the length of the seam. As I go, I'm pressing forward, and I'm also pressing out. In the front, you've got your finished, piece that's all one solid piece, and in the back is a different story. Because this is attached to the back of the piece, it has, kind of a flap here. This white fabric here, it's not going to be seen. It's in really good shape, and we're going to try to keep that for our finished piece to put it back on. And as you go, again, you're going to put your pressure to the finished fabric rather than the white fabric, because we don't want to rip this. So again, the pressure goes down and out toward the finished piece. If there are any portions that you're unsure of how you're going to remember how things go together, a great way to take care of this is to try and mark things out with pins. So I have a pin here and a pin here, marking exactly where the edges of the fabric, finished fabric is, and then the area in between I've marked with a little note here saying sew here with 2 arrows on either end. So that way when I put the entire piece back together, I know exactly where it's going to go. While my cat has taken up residence on the sofa, I felt the need to offer some words of encouragement at this point, because I know that this is the point where people really start panicking and get intimidated by the growing pile of fabric in front of them. As long as you're going through and you're labeling every single piece, I can guarantee you that when you start laying out your individual pieces on your fabric to cut, that it'll all start making sense. And that's a really good feeling when it starts making sense, because you'll have conquered it. So, you know, let's just boil it down to what we're doing right now and focus on what we're doing right now. And right now we're taking apart each piece individually, and yeah, we're piling it up, but you know, I just don't want you to feel as if this is something that you're going to walk away from. One great tip for the cushions in particular, if you're working on a piece like a sofa that has a right and a left side, it might be a good idea to keep one of the extra cushions off to the side until you're done cutting, so that way you can see it, you know, how everything goes together, how the pleats are spaced, where exactly they are. And what I try to do when I take things apart is anything that has a pleat, I'll put a pin in that position, so that way I know, oh, be aware that there's something going on there, and then I can look back to the old piece and see exactly how it was folded, and I can repeat that on my new fabric. Even though the back cushions are attached directly to the sofa, it still has a zipper in the bottom. So when I go ahead and take that apart, I just want to show you what I've encountered on the other side that I've already started. Each zipper is cut from a giant length of zipper material. And so what they do when they make these types of cushions is they make their own lengths, and they need to tie off each end. So on each end, they've taken just a scrap piece of fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep that scrap piece of fabric, it's usually a nice thick piece, and just pin it to the ends of each length of zipper. So I have one on the right side and one on the left side. And then when I get to the sewing room, I will show you exactly how to finish off those edges. As I take apart the cushion, I'll be highlighting one of two ways to put the cushion back together. In this particular case, it's made out of 3 separate pieces of fabric. One being the top, the second one being the side, and the third one being the bottom. But for my purposes, I was going to put the piece back together with a contrasting fabric for the welting. So in order to do that, I'll need to turn that into 5 pieces of fabric. And I think for the first time around, it's probably going to be a much simpler process for you to grasp. So as you're taking apart your cushion, just be aware that in this case, it was made in 3 separate pieces. So when I pull it off, I don't want to remove this welting from the 2 sides. I want to keep that intact, so that way when I cut it, I can spread it apart and get that perfect distance between the 2 pieces of welting, so that when I put my cushion back in, it'll be perfectly spaced. Today we're talking about fabric and fabric choices. This particular fabric that I chose is a railroaded fabric. A railroaded fabric simply means what direction the motif is printed or woven into the fabric. I have a tulip outline here just to kind of demonstrate the difference. In my railroaded fabric, I have a leaf pattern and vine pattern that runs in this direction, which means that the tulip is facing this way. If the tulip were facing this way, it would be a vertically run fabric. And what that means to you as far as reupholstering is that when you put your sofa back together, chances are you'll have to put 2 or 3 extra seams into the fabric to get it to run the entire width of the sofa. So just be aware that there are also considerations with the amount of fabric that you'll have to purchase in order to complete that. 14 yards of fabric is what I have. 18.5 yards is probably what you would need if you had a vertically run piece of fabric instead. So just be aware that those are the 2 considerations that you have to make. This is the leaf pattern that I'm going to be using for the very center of all of my pieces. When you're about to lay out all of your pieces on your new fabric, my recommendation is to start with the largest pieces first. In this case, I have a left arm and a right arm piece that I simply pulled off my fabric pile. And in talking about that center motif, I've located the very center of my left arm, and it happens to be right here. If I peel it back, I can locate my center motif of my new fabric in the exact same spot. So I know I'm dead on with that. I know I've lined it up properly. And what I'll do from this point is go ahead and pin everything down nice and flat and get on as much as I can on this one run of fabric and putting the larger pieces on first and then filling in with some of the smaller pieces around it and making sure that I can get as much fabric pieces on there as possible without too much of the new fabric showing in between each other. That leaf pattern is directly centered underneath this arm. There's another one that occurs 27 inches later that I cannot use for the arm because it's too close. So I jump to the next leaf pattern 27 inches away from that. Now that one happens to be directly underneath the center of this arm piece. This skirt piece is lined up with that center leaf motif. If I locate the center of this skirt, that it's going to be in line with the center of that leaf pattern. The easiest way to find the center of your fabric is to fold it in half lengthwise, edge to edge, meeting the edges here, and then pulling it taut. And then the very center of that should be the very center of your motif that you're trying to match it to. So it's just a super easy way to find that quickly. I've rolled out another section of fabric and started cutting my cushion pieces. There are also larger pieces that go first, so I lay those on, making sure that the very centers of them have my leaf motif directly underneath it. So I have one cushion and another cushion, and then this is the back cushion. And I fill in all of these areas around this empty space. As long as all of your arrows are facing in the exact same direction, it'll all look great when you put it all together. So I just wanted you to know that, yes, this center motif is the most important thing when you're cutting this out. But these little ancillary pieces, don't worry about them. As long as they're facing all in the same direction, it'll turn out perfect. Here's a good example of how you make a pattern piece out of a piece of cushion that still has the welting on it. What I've done, I've taken it apart with my seam ripper. I have kept the welting in place and I've spread everything out nice and flat. So your pattern piece is going to turn out just perfect. This piece happens to be the very back of the cushion with the zipper that's going to be attached to it. I finally finished cutting out all the fabric pieces for the sofa. What I do have left over, however, is I need to cut out all of my fabric for my welting. And this is the things that go around the cushions and around the back of the sofa and around the skirt. How am I going to get the entire length out of just the scrap material that I have left? And believe it or not, I will. I'll have some fabric left over. But I will save that for the sewing segment to cut the rest of those scrap pieces out. And just let you know that as you're looking at this pile that I've created, I have one pile here that's neatly stacked, and this represents the pieces that I don't have to do any work to before they get reapplied onto the piece. The stack over here, I do have to do some work to most of these pieces. Every single thing that I'm going to do in the sewing room is going to be straight stitching. So even though the pile is very, very large at this point, we're going to condense those down to maybe 3 or 4 pieces that we'll be carrying back up to attach to the sofa. So again, it's not, please don't be intimidated by it. It's just one thing that we're going to approach one at a time, and as we're done, we'll carry those pieces up and continue with our straight stitching.